in one of the talks, there was a discussion about the five senses. And then in a writing there was a mention of the five senses of the soul that maybe Rumi mentioned, I think. So just an inquiry about the five senses or the senses of the soul, or to talk about the feeling of desire for the unnameable, or something that is either unknown or like mysterious in a way. Just that the impulse of desire for something. The nature of desire.
You know, Jackie can probably explain gravity much better than I can. I don't know much about the five senses of the soul. I think these are mysterious things, and you know, they can only be spoken by people who actually know what they are, and I'm not one of them, so I'm not going to say much. But I suppose if you were to ask, why is it that people cry? Why don't they scream? Or why don't they go for a walk? Or why don't they read? Or why don't they engage in a conversation? I think you can only approach it in a negative way, in the sense that you have an experience, it kind of jolts you, it comes to you as a shock. It could be negative or positive, it doesn't really matter. It's not something you expected. It may be the outcome of pain or grief, the experience. And the only language that's accessible to you is just tears. You know. And so if you were to ask, for example, well, how do I get there? How can I communicate through my weeping? Well, it goes back to the center of gravity. What is it that pulls you down? You know. You know, the five physical senses are profoundly powerful. You begin your life with the five senses. Nobody comes out spiritual, I don't think, at least. I think what usually happens is the physical world can be very attractive. It could also be quite ugly. It could bring about a good amount of pleasant feelings. It could also bring about horrifying feelings. And the negative and the positive to some extent have to do with the sort of culture in which you live and the sort of narratives that they create. Because then you will have interpretation of experiences, you know. You know, you go to a gathering, you see a man or you see a woman, your eyes say, you know, that happens to be a very attractive person. And you fall into the trap of the visual, you know, what you see. And it's very instinctual. You don't have to reflect, you don't have to think, you don't have to do anything extraordinary. Your body has the wisdom to tell you if you want to, if this person is pulling you towards himself or not. Okay. Then, after spending some time with him, you have this intense desire to be around him or her all the time. Never during the course of this relationship do you reflect what is love, how does it come about, why is it sometimes, why is it that sometimes it creates this feeling of contraction, why is it that sometimes it creates the feeling of expansion. In contraction you feel this longing, the separation, it's agonizing. And in expansion, there is this union with your companion that you feel, and it's like, you know, walking in the Garden of Eden. It's paradise. It's beautiful, because something about you that was fragmented, that was incomplete, all of a sudden becomes whole. And this physical relationship, again, whether it's negative or positive, it matters very little. But what it does do is that it either becomes the bringer of hope or it becomes the bringer of fear. You have a relationship with someone, imagination kicks in, and then you begin to think about marriage and having children and living with this person until both of you are like 90, you know, in this beautiful house and ABCD. Or the relationship happens to be the creator of negative feelings and emotions, where you dread going and seeing this person, but you have to because, well, you know, you don't really have any other physical spaces to go to. And so imagination kicks in. Is he going to be drunk today? Is he going to be mean today? But that's the world of physicality and all the senses involved, you know. I am really not quite sure at what stage someone becomes free of, or I'm not quite sure at what stage someone who has been in love or who is in love kind of sits back and says, okay, what is really the nature of love? Because it goes beyond your five senses. You can't touch it, you can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't touch it. But it's like you have been initiated into this world where the five senses can no longer reach. You want to intellectually think about it, but all you know is that when you want to kind of apply your intellectual prowess, you realize that you're just kind of hanging on to the old narratives. You know, a book here, a book there, a paragraph there, a paragraph there, and it's not working out for you. And in some ways, I think if you're able to sit in the unknown, because what happens is there are two poles. You know, you have this desire to be in love with this man. You also have this newfound desire to understand the nature of love. They're both like seeds. The only difference is that you have been hanging out with this man for about 2 years. And in these 2 years, physically, you have been intimate. Intellectually, you have created stories with this man. You have an emotional relationship. So there's already a foundation built on the side. This new seed says, figure out what love is, the nature of love. It's something like Socrates would say throughout the dialogues. I'm not talking about justice in regards to what's happening in Russia or Ukraine. I want to know what justice is in itself. It's an introduction to, say, a non-sensory definition. The problem is now that this brand new seed has to fight against a seed that has already sprouted. Maybe there is a stem, maybe there are leaves, maybe there are branches, maybe there is a trunk that's already very, very thick. And there is no chance for this other seed to blossom. It just gets crushed. Now, it doesn't mean you won't desire it. It doesn't mean that once in a while you're not inspired to kind of pursue this desire. The only problem is the gravitational pull on this end is so powerful that whatever inspiration may have existed, it just disappears. It's kind of like one of those things that happen to you as you age or as you gain some maturity, where because you're young, because you're healthy, because you're hopeful, you want to extend a compassionate hand to everyone who's in need. Okay? As you get some age on you and some insight and maturity and experience, you realize, well, everybody, everything on this planet there is a limited resource to everything, including, as a human being, your time, your energy, your youth, all that stuff. And it's kind of like the red light, on the dash is beginning to light up, saying that you're almost empty of gas. You need to refuel. And all of a sudden you become very mindful of how hard you're pushing the gas pedal, how fast you're going. And you keep looking for a gas station to refuel. I think when you are very, very young and ambitious, and when your 5 senses have been contaminated, in the sense that, one sense has a chain around your neck, another has a chain around your wrist, another has a chain around your legs. There is no way to become free of them. It's impossible. Now, you can work with someone who is young and who is hopeful, who has not been varnished by experience, and he or she will say to you, I think I can heal you. I can bring those non-sensory 5 senses into your being or into your soul. I don't think it's possible. I think it's a complete waste of time. I think there needs to come a point where something about you just blossoms, whether it's through your own reflections, life experience, where you realize you have ran for the past 50 years and you have ended up absolutely nowhere. And you need to have enough honesty and humility about you. And you must have come to a place where you're mature enough not to express this anger all the time everywhere. It just makes you ridiculous. So at this stage, you kind of say, okay, I've tried to bring rest to my being for the past 50 years. It's just not happening. So the path I'm on is no longer working. And so you become curious about perhaps other possibilities in life that may exist for you. This is, again, whether or not you can kind of find your place in life through the non-senses, 5 senses, They're not going to just come to you. You have to, because it's very difficult to kind of detach yourself from 50 years of living in your body and making judgments through your body and through what you see and what you touch and what you hear. And it's very difficult to find freedom from all the memories that live inside you. Memories of pleasure and hope where you want them to be repeated. Memories of pain and harm where you want to forget. You can't no longer entertain those things, because if you do, you simply just get back into the physical aspect of it. And if you were to kind of look at them as gifts, these non-physical five senses, and if you were to look at them as, say, I don't know if you want to look at them as guests or hosts, I don't really know, but they kind of sit back and they have to find you worthy. It's something I usually talk about in classes about the goddess of Vak. She's an Indian goddess who lives in the throat. Indians are, they have strange philosophies where every part of your body houses a certain deity. So, and the philosophy is that everybody talks, including me. And most of what we say is just garbage. It's just nonsense. It's gossip. It's there to waste time because we don't really know what to do with quietness or silence. And our physical life, it's so consumed with trivial things. I mean, they're important, You have to talk about rent. You have to talk about moving away from Oakland to Sacramento. You have to talk about food. You have to talk about what's the best school for your kids. You have to kind of sit and talk about with your husband about the politics of life, the compromises you have to make in relationships. I mean, these things are just physical things. You're in life, and life will possess you, will own you, will contaminate you. And so most of our daily business really is about thinking and just talking about this stuff. And so Vak, because she's a goddess and because she's all about inspiration, because she's about curiosity, she's about wisdom, she doesn't want to get involved with anybody. It doesn't matter who it is, who can't be a good host. So she just kind of sits and waits and waits and waits until someone gets consumed by curiosity. Not curiosity about, should I move to Sacramento or Roseville? Or should I send my kid to private school or public school? Or should I go out with this guy or that guy? Or should I break up with him today or tomorrow? I mean, these are okay things to think about and talk about. But, it's kind of like the story of Pegasus. Vak, in some sense, looks out and says, human beings have wings, but these wings will never get a chance to move, to flap, to fly, because human beings are just contaminated. They're just pulled down by all the worries and troubles of physical life. So these five senses that are non-physical will never be activated inside them. So she waits for someone to no longer be interested in these things. And then the problem with all of a sudden losing your interest and attraction to your physical life is that you have been around them for 50 years. And now all of a sudden they're gone. What's going to happen to you? Now you're angry with this new relationship you have with something that's unknown, something that just kind of knocked on the door and just barged in without permission. You look at your husband, he's a nice guy, you just don't want to be around him. You got great kids, but you just don't want to be around them. You have a great job, but you no longer care for it. You have all these memories of your friends, but it's as if they never existed. And so what begins as inspiration and curiosity becomes your initiation into dread. It's an awful place to be. You lose hope. You wonder if there is something wrong with you. Your friends are laughing and there you are just moping around. Everybody has a place to go, you have no place to go. You don't know if you're blessed or you've been cursed, And you employ all sorts of tricks, especially these days. You sit and you do yoga, you do meditation, you breathe deeply, you listen to chant music, maybe even you chant in hopes of something. And there is nothing that's positive about this stage. It's a horrifying place to be because there is nothing that you can grab. There is nothing you can hang on to and pull yourself up. You kind of just get depressed. If you have a support system and if you're receptive enough, if you have the capacity to listen and to do, then perhaps through, some teaching, through a support system, you can kind of be taken out and be trained, and then all these other senses that you're talking about will eventually kick in time. But one of the non-physical senses that Rumi talks about is the nose. That you no longer begin to discern, you no longer begin to make conclusions or judgments or observations based on what you see and what you hear and what you touch and what you taste. It's all about smell, but this particular smell is intuitive. You sit somewhere, you look at someone, and they just don't feel right. And it doesn't matter if Jesus Christ comes down to you and says, turn the other cheek. You're not going to do so. Because you've come at a certain place where you trust your intuition. You know what you're smelling and you trust what you're smelling. And it doesn't smell good. Because remember, when you lose this pull towards the old life, there is no compass, there are no cannons, there is no measurement. There is nothing that you can go to find meaning or purpose or figure out whether something has meaning, has value. You're in darkness, It's kind of like the story that Rumi or Shakespeare say in regards to a man being in a dark room and, 5 of them, and one touches something and he says it's a rope, another says it's a leaf, another says it's, I don't know, a post or a column. The light is turned on and they realize it's an elephant, the ears and the trunk and the legs. And you get to a place where you lose identity, confidence. You don't trust anything about you anymore. I remember that when I was younger, whatever I wanted to do, the first person I would call was Hussein. Every time. There was a young woman I really liked and wanted to get married, and I said to him, well, what do you think about, you keep telling me I should get married, what do you think about this person? And he looks at me and says, no, I don't think so. I say, well, okay. Or one time I would say, I go to classes, these philosophy classes, and they're really, really awful. Just, well, drop them, just leave school then. So, and do what with it? The point I'm trying to make is that just because I read books, and just because I was going to gatherings, and just because I would write, and just because I would think some ridiculous, infantile thoughts, it didn't mean that I was at a place where I had access to these non-sensory senses, I couldn't smell, I couldn't see, I couldn't hear. And I don't know when they kick in. And I don't know how they happen. I don't know at what stage Vok enters into you and begins to kind of speak through you. I don't know when that happens. The problem I think with us modern folks is that because there are so many books out there, and because especially self-help books, and because there is really an abundance of things, and we can get them and use them so easily, the assumption is, well, if there is something wrong with you, or if you have a question, or you are dissatisfied in some shape or form, you can actually grab a book, read the book. Maybe you can have a journal and write your thoughts and feelings in this notebook. And after a few months, you're able to piece together this puzzle. You will have access to all the missing pieces. And I don't think it's true. First, I think these questions, for the longest time in human history, were really just available to very few people, very, very few people, you know. I don't know if you've heard of Saint Bernadette. She's this young girl somewhere in France, right? She is sickly. She's got 2 sisters, I think, and a bunch of friends. All of a sudden, she has a vision. She's sick. And when she had, and the problem with her sickness was that she would get tired very quickly. She could never go in cold water because then she would feel even worse. But once she has this vision, all of a sudden it's as if her physical body is able to overcome all the illness that lived inside it. She's running, she's laughing, she doesn't sleep, she prays all the time. Now, modernity has us believe that if you just sit and close your eyes and meditate on the image of Virgin Mary, whatever shape or form that image may be, eventually this woman will speak to you. And I don't think it's true. It's kind of like what Freud had said about Saint Francis of Assisi. Assisi, very much like Jesus Christ, had mentioned that we should love everybody. Because love is something that is divine. And since God gives freely, and if love lives inside you as it ought to, then you should just give it freely. And Freud said, no, why would you want to do that? The truth is, some people are just not lovable. Why the hell would you want to force yourself to love someone when intuitively, instinctually, organically, you just don't love them? Because, and I think Freud is right. There's a good amount of wisdom in that. We do it on a daily basis. You go out with someone, and they happen to be drinking a bit too much. Let's just say it as it is. They're alcoholic, or they're addicted to some drug, or whatever the case may be. All of us are addicted to something. Some addictions could be categorized as positive and good. Many can be categorized as negative and bad and harmful. So if someone is addicted to something that's just negative and harmful, well, you are not immortal. You don't have an infinite amount of energy, time, patience. There comes a point where the umbilical cord breaks, is cut. You lose your patience, you lose your stamina. We do it on a daily basis with our kids, with our companions, with our job, with yourself. Again, I don't really know much about these non-sensory five senses, but I do know that if you want to understand grief, if you want to understand loneliness, there has to come a point where you live outside of yourself, where you can look at your grief as objectively as possible without contaminating your observation with your ridiculous infantile psychological narratives. You know, I think there is something to be said about Socrates' teacher. An old woman who lives in the woods in a hut, who says, if you're here looking for philosophy, ideas, I can't give them to you. I don't really care for them. But I can teach you how to love. And if you have loved, you know that it is not reachable to the senses. It may have its genesis in you looking at a guy and all of a sudden your brain chemistry begins to change, and you move towards him and you talk to him and he sounds good and you shake his hand and his hand feels good, and you sit and you have a conversation. Intellectually he sounds really, really, really good. And, a month later you say, I'm completely in love with this person. From that point on, it doesn't matter if he hasn't showered for weeks. It doesn't matter if he comes to the date, his shirt being like smelly and oily and has all these, is torn apart. You don't really care about those things. To mo mivini o man picheshemu. That Majnun had the story of Layli and Majnun. Cassie knows the story much better than I. In fact, Cassie knows everything much better than I. Majnun is this guy. In Persian, it means the intoxicated. She takes this young woman home to have them meet this girl, and the parents, when they meet this girl, they're horrified. First she just doesn't look good. And they look at this Majnun who's very attractive, and in a high, social class. And they say to him, what is wrong with you? Are you blind? Can't you see how ugly, how unattractive this girl is? And he looks at his parents and he says, اگر بر دیده مجنون نشینی به غیر از خوبی لیلی نبینی. That if you were to look at this girl from my eyes, through my eyes, all you would see is beauty. All of us have these moments, but these moments that are gifted to us are really limited to ridiculous obsessions that we have about various things. So we never really get to this point where we can actually look at, I can't say look at life entirely because none of us have access to the entirety of life, but we can look at life and discern some of the events that are happening in it and figure out where exactly we belong. By using these other senses, that again, once in a while you experience yourself having when you fall in love.